friends are heathens, take it slow.
What is going on YouTube? How are you guys? I'm gonna be a little quiet today because there are a lot of people in the house that are asleep, including my sister, who is actually asleep in the room directly above me. So I am not going to get very loud. I'll try to play with the audio levels if this is not loud enough. Anyways, I wanted to try to attempt to do a Future History of Japan episode 2, and kind of cover why I haven't released one in a while. So I might make this more than just a two-part thing. I know I said in part 1 that it was probably going to be a two-part, but the last couple of times that I've tried to make a second part, I've ended up talking for about 2 hours, and it just doesn't work. You guys aren't going to sit through a 2-hour long video about a country most people don't really care about outside of, oh, hey, cool, that country puts out really cool electronics, and that country also puts out anime, and blah. Awesome! But there's a lot more that's going on with Japan. It is a really awesome country all on its own, despite being the home of anime, and awesome electronics, of course. Japan is also a very interesting country, and one of the things that I'm going to stop for just a second because I haven't really fully explained myself, but Japan has a lot of really cool stuff going for it, and it's not just a home of anime and really awesome electronics. It's a really amazing country on its own. So I'm going to leave that there and try to cover some other bases before I get started. And I'm going to try to rant as little as possible, because this is potentially going to be a really long video. So the reason that I have not made another video, as I said earlier, is because the last couple of times that I have tried to film a part 2, it has ended up being a really, really long video. And first off, people don't want a long video. They might listen for 20 minutes, and if I can get people to listen for 20 minutes, that's awesome, but generally that doesn't happen. So here is the thing. Every time that I've tried to do a video, I've tried to back it up with a ton of evidence and a ton of information. You know what? I'm not going to do that, because when I talk to people in person about what's going on with Japan and what I see for its future, I don't have the opportunity to provide them with all the information on the spot, because it's usually, like, it happened a couple of nights ago when I was at the bowling alley with my dad. One of his friends was asking about Japan, and I started talking about what I foresee happening in Japan, and he was really interested. But there was never a demand for more information or sources of information or anything like that, because, like, we're at the bowling alley, you know. This isn't a college level class that I'm issuing or anything like that. You're not going to get any course credit for listening. So, you know, it is what it is. But here's the thing: I'm not going to provide all of the evidence because, one, it's not a fact. It is my opinion of where I think the future is going to go for these three countries, and based on that opinion and what I foresee is why I want to go to Japan. Now, there's plenty of reasons that I want to go to Japan. It's not just for that, but the primary source, or the primary reason, would be I want an interesting future, not a boring future for myself. I don't want to be stuck in an office. I ran away from office jobs because they were incredibly boring and I was losing my mind. And part of me is telling myself that I need to just deal with it. I need to go to an office and I need to just sit there and be bored like everybody else and not enjoy anything that I do. Just put up with it, make the paycheck, and go home. But I don't feel called to do that. And I certainly am way too ambitious to sit around and do something like that. I have a lot of opportunities that I could take advantage of that would make me more money than sitting in an office anyways. But in all honesty, even those opportunities aren't what I really want to do with my life. And I know it's kind of weird at being 30 years old, but all of the opportunities that I've been given, none of them seem that appealing to me. I can make money, but I probably won't enjoy doing it. And so I've kind of run away from that, which is a little childish and immature, I'll admit that. But for the most part, what I would like to do is be in Japan and be around a culture that I really appreciate. So skipping all of the evidence, all of the background, there's information out there, and if you don't agree with my opinion, that's fine. I'm not going to be like a flat earther and tell you that if you don't believe my opinion, you're an idiot, but it's not your fault because this is how you were raised all your life. No, I might do, I may do a flat earther video in the future because it's hilarious. I'm a round earther, so take that, you flat earthers. Anyways, that said, I am going to be pretty light on the sources of information. You guys can go and find them for yourself. It's just an opinion. If you don't like my opinion, if you don't agree with my opinion, then screw it. I'm not too concerned about that. I thought I would be very factual and provide you tons of evidence and information, and you know what, that's just going to be a ridiculously long video. So if you want a ridiculously long video, then I would suggest you do your own research, because I found a ton of really awesome information when I started looking into these things, and it was just interesting, but most people don't really care. If you're one of those people that cares, you like doing the research on your own, and there's no reason for me to provide that. So going forward on that basis, I'm not going to cover myself or try to back up my reasoning for these statements. If you don't like my statements, then move on. I'm sorry. I'm really not. I'm not even sorry. If you don't like my statements, then screw off. That said, so what's going on in the future with Japan that I see is not just a situation for just Japan. It's actually involving China, India, and Japan. It involves a few other countries, but none of them are going to be moving up onto the same stage that China, India, and Japan are, and all three of those countries are going to be stepping up to the world stage that the United States and Russia are on. And what I mean by this is we're talking about countries that are economically, militarily, and generally have a strong presence in the world in a number of other fields as well. So if you look at the United States and if you look at Russia and you see their presence in the world, you kind of see very, very powerful countries, not just militarily, but you also see a strong economic power. Even though Russia is under some sanctions right now, Russia doesn't really appear, I could be wrong, but Russia doesn't really appear to be flinching too much by that. They have their own goals, they're going to do their own thing, and if people don't like that, they're going to get over that. I don't see Vladimir Putin being Hitler. I don't see him being a ruler who wants to take over the world, and with that I have a little bit of respect for him, because he's certainly got plenty of power, and he could certainly start marching around Asia and parts of Europe and really be a really cruel ruler, but I haven't seen him trying, and I could be missing information on that, but this isn't about Russia anyway, so I'm going to move on. But anyways, the United States and Russia are really strong and really powerful countries, and they kind of do what they want. They have enough presence among the world that regardless of how controversial it might be that they're doing something, generally nobody's going to say anything to them, and it's not just because of the military power, it's also because of other reasons. And China is really close to moving on to that same level, that same stage that the United States and Russia are on right now. And China will most certainly be the next country to reach that, as we see the European Union start to fall apart. I mean, we've got the Brexit situation going on. That's already over. The UK has voted to leave the European Union, and several other countries are going to follow very shortly after. I don't think this is going to be like the end of countries in Europe. It's going to be a little bit traumatic, but we'll see a rebalance in the future. I mean, it's just going to be what it is. That said, China is going to be rising to join the United States and Russia on the same stage, being world powers, really strong, being a really strong country, and they kind of already are. They're kind of towing a line in which it's like they're not announcing it, and they're not trying to throw their weight around, but they're certainly in a position right now where they could just step up and say, "Hey, we're here, and you're going to deal with us or screw off." But I don't really foresee them totally reaching that level of power for maybe another decade, 15 years. So I'm estimating around 2030, we'll see China really be recognized as Russia or as the United States is recognized. And that'll be interesting on some levels. But the big thing that's going to be an issue from this is the feelings of some of the Southeast Asian countries. Japan and India are not the only two countries affected, but I'm only going to be talking about them. So forgive me if I'm leaving out your country or another country that you care about. It's not that I don't care about those countries, it's just they're not the topic of this conversation. With China moving up to that level of stage, India, which is already a military country and already working to strengthen its military and its internal infrastructure and its technology, as well as a number of other things, India is really rising to become a very strong country. And as long as that passion and that fire to grow does not die out, India is probably going to grow to be a world power as well. Now, we're looking somewhere around 2050, 2060 for India. I'm thinking it'll be around 2050, late 2050s, early to mid 2060s before India joins China, Russia, and the United States. But Japan, on the other hand, will be a riser as well. And they have already started to rise. And the first aspect to that, which people don't really like, but the Prime Minister of Japan currently recognizes that this is the area that he needs to step up for the rest of the country to follow. And he's working on it. Now I see that, and I kind of like that. And I don't see everything, so if you're in Japan and you're seeing some other things and you don't agree with me, I'm sorry, I don't see everything. So there is that. But Japan is already working on a number of changes to their country, a few of them to their culture, which will be kind of interesting, but nothing that changes the way that the people live their lives too dramatically. Some of the things that they're discussing changing is how women in the workplace are handled, and some of the disadvantages that women have with the respect to how leaves of absences are handled. And there's a few things, like here in the United States, if a woman gets pregnant and she's forced to stop working because her doctor says she has to, or she doesn't feel comfortable or safe working anymore, the company would have to let her leave for maternity leave for a period of time, and once she was safe to return back to work, she's guaranteed her same position or an equivalent position with equivalent pay. But apparently, and I could be missing some information here, so I apologize if I'm slightly inaccurate in this respect, but apparently in Japan that it does not work necessarily that same way. Most of the time, if you leave a company in Japan, you don't laterally move over to another company. You start over pretty much from the ground floor. You might start a few steps higher than somebody fresh out of college, but you're generally not going to move from a vice president position to another vice president position. You're not going to move from a management position to another management position. And again, I could have my information mixed up, but from what I've heard, generally working for a company is a life decision. It's not just a career decision. There are no temporary moves. It is something You are going to be hired in by this company and you plan to work for that company until you retire, and that's right out of college, which is very difficult. And from what I understand, it's one of the other things that Japan is trying to change. But for women who have to take a break for a pregnancy, they generally feel that they're not going to have the same opportunity when they return, and so they put off having children. And this is part of the reason, or part of the claimed reason, that Japanese birth rates seem to be declining. Now, there's some argument about the declining birth rates, but from what we see statistically, we know that the Japanese birth rates are below 2.1, which means they are losing people rather than replenishing people or gaining in population. And it's estimated that they're going to lose about 80% of their workforce by 2050. So that's a little bit dangerous. And there's a number of things that they're discussing on possibly changing to fix that situation. One of those things is to change some of the legislation that would allow women to leave for maternity leave and return under better conditions, or the same conditions. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say better conditions. To return under the same conditions or similar conditions to what they left. And I'm kind of hoping that they actually do that. I think morally that women deserve that, obviously, and economically, I think that would be an actually good position for companies to take. There are certainly other countries that have taken similar steps, and they've been really super successful, and they've seen productivity go they've seen productivity work out pretty well. So hopefully Japan will take the steps in the same direction, and that will really help them out. Another thing is they're discussing, I don't know how much they're discussing, the thing that I heard was at least suggested is that they make English an official language of Japan. And the reason for that is because English is so well diversified around the world, and it is one of the common languages that businesses actually conducted in. So they're discussing making English an official language because they think that it would increase immigration, it would increase foreign investment or interest in the country, and that could help, one, increased population, and two, increase industry as well. One of the things that they're definitely going to need, and especially if Shinzo Abe has his way, and I'll get to this topic in a minute, one of the things that they're definitely going to need is more people to work. One of the things that I see for Japan is a huge production boom, where I believe that we are going to see Japan start another record-setting manufacturing run, and Japan is going to start pushing out exports in the future, in the very near future, that will probably rival what China can do, or what China is currently doing. And that, for me, it stands out pretty remarkably. If you understand anything about Chinese exports, or if you don't understand anything about Chinese exports, look at pretty much anything electronic that you have and find the sticker that says where it was made from. And quite a few things you will see are made in China. This doesn't necessarily mean that they're designed in China, it just means that they were manufactured in China because China doesn't tax its exports, the United States doesn't tax its imports, and the cost of labor in China is incredibly cheap compared to the cost of labor in the United States. So not only are you not paying tariffs to import products from another country, but you're also not having to pay as much in labor as well. So that really helps out, which is why the Chinese markets, or Chinese manufacturing markets, have been so successful. So that said, with Japan releasing more exports than China, that should be a big kind of indicator that I foresee a lot of really amazing things going on for Japan. And I'm being very serious about that. A lot of people don't really believe me. I think that's one of the aspects that throws people for a loop. But it's definitely something that I foresee for Japan's future, and it's going to be necessary, and it will happen all on its own if Shinzo Abe has his way. And I'll talk about that now. What I see Shinzo Abe trying to do is increase Japan's military abilities. There are a ton of things that are actually calling for this geopolitically, and it's not a bad decision to make. I don't think that Shinzo Abe is trying to build another imperialist Japan. I don't think that he is in any way trying to create a supernation or anything like what we've previously seen. I think this is totally in line with an objective to, one, raise Japan's presence in the world in a positive way, and two, to protect his people. And I think Shinzo Abe understands that doing this is most likely going to lead the country in a really good direction for the most part, and really benefit its people. So boosting the military is not a bad decision. It is not a bad thing to do, but everybody is so worried about world peace that the moment somebody says, oh, this country's building their military, they immediately assume negative things, which is kind of immature. It's actually really immature, especially when you don't have a lot of information about that. Japan in particular is a very, very peaceful country for a very long time. They actually had it in their constitution that Japan would not have the right to declare war. And this is Article 9 in their constitution, and it's really important to them. Shinzo Abe is having to fight that right now because with threats from North Korea and from China, Japan really kind of needs an ability to defend itself, and especially against a country like China. Now, I'm not going to pick sides. I think you guys know which country I really like. But that said, Japan doesn't really have the weight to throw around that China does. And with China just suddenly claiming that the Senkaku Islands belong to them, and declaring it their territory and a no-fly zone and blah, 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 it's really kind of an arrogant move for China, in my opinion, but it's something that Shinzo Abe has to look at, and he has to make a decision about. That's why you see Shinzo Abe working to train counter-terrorists with the Australian counter-terrorist groups. I don't remember what Australia's counter-terrorist force is named, but right now Japan is currently training a counter-terrorist unit, or counter-intelligence unit in Australia right now, which is pretty cool. But Japan also needs to increase the strength of its military. North Korea is being a little bit more life-threateningly threatening. They've got, or they're claiming that they've got intercontinental ballistic missiles, and that Japan would be one of their targets. So Shinzo Abe was pursuing some kind of a preemptive defensive measure against North Korea, which I'm totally behind. I'm really not knocking that at all. But he thinks that that would be a very successful method of dealing with North Korea, and I really can't argue that, except that China does not want North Korea to go away. They don't want North Korea to be there, but they don't want them to go away. If North Korea goes away, then South Korea and Japan, at least, are a little bit more fearful about what's going on in the area. They've got more enemies than they want, and so South Korea is ever on its guard, and Japan obviously has another threat that it needs to watch out for, one that's being actually belligerent. And China doesn't want them to China doesn't want North Korea to go away. It doesn't necessarily like North Korea, but with it being there, it's advantageous to China. So Shinzo Abe kind of needs a military force to deal with North Korea. While I don't think that North Korea could ever march an army anywhere, Japan trying to build a military, going to do good things. When you have military ramp up, you have military development, and when you have military development, you actually develop a ton of new technologies that consumers get more use out of than the military. For example, the military is always looking for ways to secure its communications, make its communications faster, and more ever-present, without losing or compromising the integrity of the information that you're trying to transmit. So this ends up turning into a lot of technologies that consumers get because sometimes you might develop a really awesome technology for communication, but it might not be applicable for military use. Well, this gets passed down to the consumer markets. And the same thing even with military technologies. If after a certain period of time, a lot of military technology ends up getting passed down to the consumer market anyways. When they retire it, move on to something better. So even if they don't have a failure per se, and they develop a really awesome technology, that new technology is eventually going to see the consumer market. So that's something that's going to be you'll see trickling down. As you develop more for the military, you're going to develop more for your general consumers, and that is really a benefit for everybody anyways. So when we start to see some of those benefits coming out, we're going to start manufacturing new products, or Japan is going to start manufacturing new products, and when they start manufacturing new products, their demand is going to go up. When that demand is going to go up, guess what? We have to ramp up manufacturing again. And this is where Japan losing a large amount of its workforce is very detrimental, because as demand starts to increase and you don't have the population to fit that demand, what Japan is going to have to do is open their borders for people that want to come. And I'm somebody who wants to go, so I'm hoping that that will lead me to some extra opportunities, as well as the schooling that I'm going to be trying to receive while I'm over there. I'm hoping that I can open up a bunch of opportunities for myself while I'm there, and that geopolitically things will open up as well. So as we start to see these ramp-ups, you have an inflation in immigration, and then working conditions start to improve. Technologies are being developed. Japan is really going to strengthen itself a lot, really, really quickly, and it's going to grow them to a level that will be competitive with the United States, Russia, and China. And I think, interestingly, China and the United States and Russia are going to be world powers slightly different from each other. Russia and the United States are world powers mostly because of their military presence, and I think China is probably going to be a world power recognized for its manufacturing abilities, and that's going to be its really strong aspect. But Japan is probably going to be recognized on the world power stage for its technology, which will probably far outrun anybody else, and it will probably exceed other countries by initially a margin of about 10 years. And then that margin will gradually shrink from 5 to 3 years, and it will probably stay around 3 years. You'll see around in 2050, Japan should have a lead of about 7 to 5 years as far as technology is concerned from other countries, and regardless of what other countries try to do, they're not ever going to be as good as Japan for quite a while. So that again is going to draw more immigration and more development, more manufacturing, and it's going to help make Japan both strong militarily and economically. And because of that, you're going to see Japan rise. It's inevitable. It's impossible to not. And then later you're going to see India undergo a different method of getting to the same place. India is already ramping up military, and it has been for a while. They've got two borders that have difficult conflicts, one with China and one with Pakistan. And while neither of those two borders are directly confronting India with open threats or anything like that, it's definitely a lot of pressure for India to undergo, and so they're having to fight back with things like ramping up their infrastructure, ramping up their military. India's already added English as a official language. And they're working on a ton of other things to increase their society. One of the things, like sanitation issues, India is working on increasing their sanitation issues, and India is a very beautiful country all on its own, but a lot of the people that go there, usually they go knowing ahead of time that sanitation isn't a first priority in India, and it hasn't been for a very long time. But it's starting to become a focus now, and that's going to help increase tourism, which is going to help them grow in even more ways. You're going to start to see, like, we're already seeing more businesses sprouting up in India. We're seeing new infrastructure technologies being developed in India. And a lot of other really amazing things are going on in India, and that's going to, similarly to Japan, help them grow into the same world power stage that we see the other four countries. So where we currently have the United States and Russia in this unending deadlock of like who's the stronger country, we're actually about to raise three other countries into that deadlock, and it's going to be more of a panel. I would not be surprised to see all five countries leave the UN and form some other form of universal peace, whatever, agreement, organization, something of that nature. Because I think at that point they will recognize that if the five of them don't get along on their own, that there will be no way to stop anything that's going to happen in the future, which inevitably will be war, which is not the most awesome topic to cover, but war is definitely coming, and unless the five countries can get together, unless these five countries can really come together and create this new world peace focus, then we're going to see another round of military development that is going to be really, really impressive. And what I'm hoping is that all we get to is a Cold War, is another Cold War. I'd rather we have another Cold War than another hot war, obviously, but that is going to really change things. Now, what I see is a semi-Cold War, or a mostly Cold War. There might be some light skirmishing, but I think while peace talks are going on, nothing serious is going to go down, and we're probably going to see a really, really awesome move. But those are topics for another day. I'm going to stop here. I think that I might be able to keep this in some format that I can actually release as one piece. So that said, I hope you guys have enjoyed this conversation. And again, I hope the levels are loud enough for you guys to hear. I'll play with them in Adobe when I go through the editing. If you have liked this discussion topic, I hope that you will like it in YouTube and subscribe. And don't forget to click the notification icon. I am on my way to Japan. I have got one more week here in Miami before I am going to be going to Colorado, and things are going to get pretty interesting in Colorado. Miami is like a family vacation. I'm not working here. I'm not really doing a whole lot. I'm going to the gun range tomorrow, and that's going to be a whole lot of fun. But being here in Miami is more about me spending time with my family. When I get to Colorado, I certainly have family there, but that's going to be a lot about working and making some money really quick. So that said, I will talk to you guys later, and I hope that you guys will stay in touch. Bye.
Please don't